Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on virtual worlds. This is the first of a series of 3 webinars touching upon different aspects of virtual world technologies and market in Europe, and it's part of the OPENVERSE project. I'm Lapo Fioretti, I'll be your moderator as well as the keynote speaker for today. I'm a research analyst from IDC. And I'm very happy to be joined by a great, a pool of other speakers today that I'll introduce you in a second. Before jumping into today's content, couple of housekeeping rules. This webinar will be recorded, and you will have access to the recording in the upcoming days. As you can see, this is a Zoom webinar format, so only the panelists and the speaker will have access to the camera and to the mics and share the screen. But please feel free to put your questions and comments in the Q&A section that you have available on the screen. There will be a dedicated Q&A session at the end, so please do share your questions as we go through the presentation. So today's agenda, what is OPENVERSE? So I will hand it over in a second to Fabio Perossini from Lisbon Council to provide an overview of the OPENVERSE project. Then I will go through some of the key market trends of virtual world technologies in Europe. And then I am very lucky to have here Michael Barngrover and Lukasz Porwol for a panel interview to get their insights on the key market trends. And then we'll conclude with as mentioned, with a Q&A session at the end. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Fabio for a quick overview of the project. Fabio.
Okay, thanks a lot. I am Fabio Perossini. I am the project coordinator and I'm working for Lisbon Council. Here I will give you an overview of the OPENVERSE project in order to facilitate the comprehension and the understanding of the objective and the achievement of the project. Next slide, please. Okay, thanks. So the main objective, the mission of the project was to help Europe to build the next generation of virtual worlds, but in a wider vision, so providing also an inclusive, open and ethical, responsible view of the virtual world in the next future. We know that this is a very sensible theme because there are discussions about how virtual world will interact with the physical world and how we should, in a way, give regulation and way and guideline and way to behave for the future. Next slide, please. So the first objective is to provide a European vision of virtual worlds because the situation is by now very crowded by US and Chinese solution, and the idea is to provide something that is more European oriented. To do that, the idea is to provide a technological framework. That doesn't mean to develop something, but to give some direction from the technical point of view to people who are going to develop the framework for next virtual worlds. In particular, taking into consideration the ethic and the human-centric point of view. The third objective, in fact, is really to apply the ethics and regulation to the overall virtual world, not addressing only specific points. Next slide, please. So doing that, we would like to reinforce the European innovation ecosystem, in particular due to the dimension of the average company in Europe to create advantage and empower SMEs and startups in order to give them the possibility to address the market. And this webinar in particular is addressing that point. Then there is another point that is another objective that differentiate what in Europe we are doing compare with what is going on in other area in the world is the co-creation, the idea to have a virtual world as a co-created environment involving the collaboration of stakeholder coming from a wide range of different areas. Next slide, please. What we achieved so far. So we are now in the final part of the project. The project will finish in October 2026. And we experience a growing community inside the project because we had a lot of workshops, participation to conferences, dissemination material, newsletter, digital channels. So we reach thousands of stakeholders by now, and this is a very good success. But the main point was that we start to create the feeling to move from discussion to action in the EU about the virtual world. I would like to suggest all of you to visit our website. You can find at the end the address because you will find there some useful tools such as the observatory, the wiki, the road mapping, and the co-creation tools. So this will help you to understand what OPENVERSE is going to release and what are the outcome of the project. Next slide, please. As I anticipated, the OPENVERSE Observatory is one of the outcome, and we involve several organizations and initiatives are reported there. The community is growing day by day. We just reach a very interesting results in terms of engagement. And the part related to ethics and trust in action, we design a framework of trust by design principle to be embedded in the virtual world development. And on the last and visible part, there are some policy outputs. In this project, we are going to release 5 policy briefs further than the project policy outcome. And these 5 policy briefs, 3 of them have been released, 2 will be released soon, and probably you could be invited, if you like, to participate to the discussion in this area. Next, please. Well, in terms of technological framework, there was and there is an updated version very soon, a technological framework defined, and it is available as a deliverable. And there are also few publications in which you can find the content of the discussion and the analysis done in the project. There is a tool for co-creation in virtual worlds, and this tool is going to be available on the website, so you can use this tool to experiment how to co-create in virtual world. And all these are focused on moving from insight to impact, because what we are experimenting is that OPENVERSE is going to have a very deep impact, and the discussion is very strong. To do that, we start the collaboration with a lot of initiative around Europe. For instance, we are collaborating, and we will have their participation in the final summit in September with the Virtual World Association. And that, in a sense, will keep on track what we are going to do in the project, but also after the end of the project. So the discussion now is how to keep all this achievement up and running after the end of the project. And we are now in a good shape to keep them working and alive. And I think you will be happy to join these outcomes. Next slide, please. Well, the OpenVerse is a CSA. Here you can see partner involved in the project, and we hope, I personally hope to be in touch with all of you in the very next future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Fabio. Great overview of the project. And so, as per the agenda, today I'm very happy to walk you through some of the key market trends on virtual worlds across European organization by specifically exploring survey results on the topic. But before looking at the numbers, let's make sure that we're all talking about the same thing by looking at the definition that we used in this project. So, because virtual worlds is a term that gets used in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it refers to gaming, sometimes it's the metaverse, sometimes it's VR headsets. So for this keynote, and for the whole project and for the survey that we are presenting results here today, we are using the definition developed in conjunction with the European Commission that is shown here in the slide. So in simple terms, virtual worlds are persistent, so they don't disappear when you log off. They're 3D, real-time, and immersive, meaning that the user is inside them, not really just watching. And critically, they blur the line between the real and between real and virtual. So what the user does there also has potential implication on the real world. And people use virtual world technology for a wide range of things, which just start from socializing to working to learning, doing business, playing, and creating as well. That breadth matters because it tells us that virtual worlds aren't really a single product or affect only a single industry. They're actually a layer of technology that cuts across many sectors. And this definition is the lens that we'll use for everything that follows in today's presentation when we show the market adoption, the rates, the key trends in the next slide. They all sit inside this scope. So it's not just gaming alone, it's not VR hardware alone, but the broader environment described here. And with that frame in place, let's look at where the European market actually stands today, starting with how our European organization adopting these solutions. So this slide is the first piece of evidence in our market picture. The chart shows how European organization engaged with a virtual world solution in the last two years. So we have the data from 2024 and 2025 split into 4 groups. Organization actively using virtual world technologies, those planning to use them, those interested in using them maybe in the long term but currently not using them, and then the ones not using at all. The headline here, it's quite simple. Adoption is moving in the right direction. First of all, organization actively using virtual worlds rose to just under 40% in Europe in 2025. And there's a meaningful share of the European market there. And it's a sign that the uptake is broadening rather than staying confined to early adopters. Second, the plan to use group shrunk slightly. On its own, that might look like bad news, but combined with the rise of active user, it tells a kind of positive story. People who were planning in the last couple of years have now moved on to the actual started using. So intent is converting into action. And then third, the interested but not using group is holding steady around 30%. That's our near-term pipeline, let's call it like that. So roughly 1/3 of European market is curious and watching, waiting for the right moment to move. And finally, about 20% of organizations in Europe are not using and not interested. This number is actually it's quite small, but it's persistent, and it points to a real barrier, which can be cost, lack of skills, or unclear business value. But we'll come back to those barriers later in the keynote because addressing them is where European policies and investments can make a difference. Overall, this is a healthy and sustainable adoption curve, steady movement from intention to concrete uptake with a strong pipeline to convert. And that's the foundation for everything that we'll discuss next. So if here we looked at the European market as a whole, now let's break it down by industry. Because of course, adoption is not uniform and the differences tell us where the momentum is and where there's still some work to do. The chart shows the same for group, so already using, plan to use, interested but not using, and not using and not interest across six big industry group: finance, energy and telco, retail and services, healthcare, manufacturing, and public sector. Let's walk through the key findings here. So finance is a clear leader here. About a quarter of financial services organizations are already using virtual worlds, with another 42% plan to. Combined, this is 2/3 of the sector either active or about to be. And this is the highest forward momentum of any industry on this chart. I think it's useful to point out that the finance bucket here also include the whole financial services spectrum, so insurance as well. Then moving on to healthcare, which is actually the surprise here. It ties finance on current use and around at around a quarter of organization. And on top of that is the second largest interest group. And healthcare is moving faster than its conservative reputation would suggest. And this is likely driven by more immersive and advanced training, simulation, and patient engagement use cases. Then moving on to energy, which sits just behind finance with strong active use and strong intent. These are infrastructure heavy sectors where technologies like digital twins and use cases like remote operations are clear value drivers. Then we move on to manufacturing, which is kind of an interesting case because current use is lower, around 18%, but planning is high at nearly 40. So manufacturing is mid-pack today, but data suggests that it's preparing to move. So we could expect this curve to climb over the next year. And then the last two categories, so retail and services, which is the most polarized sector. It has a decent active use, but it's also the largest not using group on the chart, over 20%. So you have a split quite significant with some retailers that are running ahead with virtual stores and customer experience, but while there is also a long tail that is not engaging at all. And finally, in the private sector, that we'll come back to that also later in the panel interview. On the surface, it looks like a laggard. It has the lowest active use, the lowest planning rate, which is often common when it comes to emerging technologies and public administration, public sector. But if you look at the interest there, the bar is quite high. There's nearly 40%, the highest of any interest industry. So the curiosity is there, and the gap between interest and action in the public sector is the single biggest pipeline on this chart. The big takeaway from the whole slide is that adoption is broad-based across the European economy. Every sector has a meaningful share already using or planning to use virtual worlds, and it's not a one industry phenomenon. It's a very much horizontal shift. So we look at the European market overall. We've broken it down by industry. Now let's look at it through the third lens, and let's look at it by splitting in technologies, looking at the key technologies for virtual worlds. So which immersive technologies are organization actually adopting, and where is the intent the strongest? So we tracked four main technologies. Not saying this is comprehensive, but we in our survey we tracked those that are some of the main ones, which are augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and digital twins. For each one, we are comparing the data from the past couple of years and looking at, just to group also for visual purposes, those already using it and those planning to use those technologies. The most important pattern on the slide is consistent across all four charts. Planned adoption is growing everywhere, every single technology. So it's planned to use share rise from 2024 to 2025, and that's a kind of a powerful signal. It tells us the European market isn't picking one winning technologies and abandoning the others. Organizations are preparing to invest across the board, also because the usage and the benefits are also quite diverse. If we start by looking at individual technologies, AR, augmented reality, has the highest planned adoption of the four. 37% of organizations say they plan to use it in the short term. And AR is the kind of the easiest entry point. It works on devices people already own, and use cases like field services, training, and retail are well understood. VR also shows the strongest year-on-year jump in intent from about 25% planning in 2024 to roughly 35% in 2025. That's a 10-point swing in a single year, which is kind of significant. And after several years of cautious VR investments, organizations are signaling that they're ready to commit. Mixed reality and digital twins follow similar shape. Both land at around 32% planning to use. Digital twin is particularly relevant for industrial, urban, and infrastructure application, where simulating the real world delivers measurable value, while mixed reality is finding its footing in hybrid scenario that blend physical and digital workforce. On the active use side, current adoption is still modest, roughly 5 to 12% across the four technologies. The market hasn't converted yet intent into deployment at scale. And that's normal for emerging technology cycle. And it's exactly the gap that the planned adoption numbers are about to fill. The main takeaway here is that Europe's virtual world adoption is not, again, anchored on a single technology. It's kind of diversified. And also maybe sometimes goes beyond this technology powered by supportive technologies essential for this immersive innovation. And we see how AR, VR, MR, and digital twins, although taking different routes, but they're all moving forward. And it's very significant for the virtual world market because it's valid, and also for a project because it validates our focus on interoperability and openness. And if the market were converging on one platform or one vendor, we would not need that. The fact is that it isn't is exactly why we do. So far we've talked about who is adopting virtual world and which technologies they're choosing. The next question that comes to mind is how mature are those deployments? When organizations say that they're using the technologies, are they running a pilot? Are they operating it? Or have they actually integrated it into the business? The chart on these slides break down adoption into 5 stages for each of the technologies that we saw before. Exploration, early pilot, broad pilot, limited operationalization, which mostly means that the technology was brought into production, but only maybe in one business unit, and then a full integration of the technology. And key takeaway here is that if we look at here, AR looks like the most mature of the 4 technologies. About 60% of organizations that are using AI have fully integrated it into their operation, which is roughly twice the rate of any other technologies. And AR's head start makes sense. The hardware is more mature, the use cases are more well-defined, and it slots into existing workflows like training against field services or to specific industries like retail without requiring a full digital transformation. Digital twins tell a more nuanced story. Almost 40% of organizations using digital twins are at limited operationalization, which is the actual highest rate of any other technologies in that stage. So digital twins are working in production, but only 6% are fully integrated. That's the lowest of the four. And the key point is here is that digital twins are deployed, but it's difficult for organization to scale this deployment. They tend to live as siloed projects, one factory, one site, one asset, rather than being woven into enterprise-wide system. VR is close behind. About 30%, 35% of organizations using VR are operationalizing it, and another 30 are in broad pilot. So VR is on the edge of crossing into scale. The next couple of years will determine whether it tips into mainstream deployment or it kind of stalls into the pilot phase. Then MR is the least mature. Around 44% of organizations using MR are steering the exploration or early pilot phase. And this is the highest share of any of those four technologies. This is not necessarily a bad sign. Mixed reality also due to the confusion about the differentiation between mixed reality and other immersive technologies, tends to put it as a generally newer technology. The hardware is still evolving, the use cases are less established, but it does not mean that MR is the technology farthest from a real world implication. Now, the picture across all four, if we look at that, the bulk of activity is in the middle of the maturity curve. Broad pilot and limited operationalization. That's a meaningful position. It tells us European organization has moved past the experimentation phase. Organizations are not just kicking the tires anymore. They're actually running these technologies in a real setting. But if you look at the right edge on the chart, across every technology, fewer than 1 in 6 organizations have fully integrated this technology there. That's an extra hurdle. So the market has an appetite. The technologies are deployed, but scaling, so turning pilots into enterprise capability, is still the bottleneck. And that's where European policies and European initiatives and then investments can make the biggest difference. The barriers to scale aren't usually about the technology itself. The technology is maturing faster than the demand is maturing. They're about interoperability, they're about skills, they're about governance, and the ecosystem around deployment. And we'll see more about those in a second. And so I think that we covered the adoption part pretty extensively, which technologies organizations in Europe are choosing and how mature those deployments are. Now let's look at the farther side of the equation. What kind of impact organizations experienced or expect these technologies to have on their business, on society, and on the workforce? Three charts here and three different lenses. So let's start with the chart on the top left. When do organizations expect virtual worlds technology to transform their business? When is this huge impact expected? The headline is that the impact is near term and not far off. Across all four of the technologies that we investigated, the bulk of organizations expect transformation either immediately or within the next 2 years. And this is not a long horizon technology anymore. Within that, each technology, of course, has a different rhythm. VR moves the fastest. 35% of organizations expect immediate impact, the highest of any technology on this chart. AR is similar but more balanced across the timeline, and digital twins are slower to start, but they peak strongly at the 2 year mark. Mixed reality is the most patient of the four. Again, this might mirror the lower adoption, but the pattern makes sense again. VR and AR change how people work and interact day to day, so the impact is felt fast. Digital twins require integration with operational system. They take longer to land, but deliver bigger structural change once they do. Now let's look at the second chart, which technology will most help address societal challenges. So looking at the social aspect of immersive technology and virtual worlds. VR leads and AR followed, and together the human-facing technologies account for nearly 30% of the responses. The signal here is clear. When organizations think about virtual worlds solving real problems for real people, accessibility, education, healthcare, social inclusion, they think about the immersive, human-centered technology first. And then there's the workforce chart at the bottom. This is the most significant number on this slide. About 78% of organizations expect meaningful workforce change in the next 3 years due to virtual world technologies. 54% expect some job displacement, and 24% expect significant job transformation. So what does it mean? So this is not a distant or hypothetical risk. 3 out of 4 European organizations are telling us today that the way work is done will change because of these technologies within 3 years. And that puts a heavy responsibility on this ecosystem. We cannot talk about virtual worlds adoption without talking about reskilling, upskilling, and its inclusive transition strategies. We can't talk about societal impact without talking about ethical governance and accessibility by design. These aren't optional add-ons to the technology agenda, they are becoming foundation. And the market is telling us that the next phase of virtual worlds in Europe will be defined as much by how we manage the workforce and societal transaction as by which technology wins. And getting that part right is the difference between a sustainable European ecosystem and the ones that creates the divide. So we've established that European organizations are adopting virtual world, that they expect impact in the near term, and the workforce will be transformed. The natural next question is why? What's actually driving this decision, the adoption, the investment, and what are organizations getting in return? 2 charts here. On the left, the drivers, what motivates organization to adopt this technology in the first place. And on the right, the benefit, what the measurable outcomes they report once they have. Let's start with the drivers. As it comes with a lot of technologies, cost and efficiency is the clear number one driver. That's not surprising when a CFO, for example, sign off on emerging technology investment. The business case usually start with operational savings. But the second place driver is the more interesting cybersecurity. That tells us something important about how the European market thinks about virtual worlds. It's not just a shiny new tech, it's being evaluated also as part of a secure digital infrastructure. Trust, identity, and data protection are first-class concerns. And this aligns directly with European regulatory priorities and with also our emphasis on a trustworthy ecosystem. After those two, you see economic performance, growth, innovation, and new customer, all within the 20-25% range. So the driver mix is balanced. Defensive motivation like cost and security, plus offensive motivations like growth and innovation. So that organization in Europe, they're not just adopting to cut cost, they aren't adopting to chase the next thing. They are doing both. At the bottom of the chart, you see things like resilience, time to market, and accessibility. These score lower today, but they're worth flagging. Accessibility in particular is an area where European policy can shift the priority list and where the human-centric design principle can lead. Now, moving on to the other chart on the right, what organization actually get out of adoption? And this is a very interesting story because there is kind of a mismatch. Organization come in chasing cost and efficiency, but the stronger results they report are in process quality, product and service quality, and customer satisfaction. Quality and people outcomes are leading the benefits list, not raw cost reduction. Cost reduction is there, of course, at 50%. Time efficiency is there at 70%. The financial benefits are real, but they're not the headline here. The headline here is quality. And if you look at employee experience, 18% of organizations cite it as a measure of benefit. That's a meaningful signal, and it tells us that virtual world aren't just changing what works gets done, but they're also influencing how works feels for the people doing it. Combined with customer satisfaction, the human dimension the human dimension of this technology is producing tangible results. So the key takeaways from this slide, again, organizations are buying virtual worlds for efficiency, but they're keeping them for quality and people. And that's a powerful and interesting pattern, because it means that the value proposition strengthens after deployment, exactly what you want for sustainable long-term adoption. So we spent the last few slides looking at where the European market is going, adoption rising, technology is maturing, and impact landing in the near term, real benefits in quality and people. So now the honest question is, what's holding the market back and what would actually end? And one of the final slides today look at both. So the chart on the left shows the main barrier organization face to scaling adoption. And while on the right-hand side, we see the top three priorities that organizations in Europe say that would be most helpful to help them accelerate adoption. If we start with the key barriers, high cost is the top obstacle, cited by over 30% of European organizations, and that's not surprising, but it's significant. It tells us that, even though we just saw cost and efficiency as the number one driver of adoption, the upfront investment is still the real hurdle. The business case is strong, but the entry ticket is quite high. Skill shortage comes second at 30%. 3 out of 10 organizations in Europe don't have the people they need to deploy these technologies. And if you connect that back to the previous slide with the 78% organization expecting workforce transformation in the next 3 years, the skill problem is going to get bigger before it gets smaller, unless there is a strong action now. Privacy concerns are also quite high there. That's actually a healthy signal. European organizations are taking data protection seriously when they evaluate emerging technologies and virtual worlds technologies, especially, exactly as they should. The challenge isn't that privacy is a worry, but it's that the market needs clear answers. So trustworthy technologies, transparent data practices, and start-on-based governance are part of how we lower this barrier. Now, if you look at the right side, we ask the same organization what would most effectively help you accelerate adoption. And these are the top three priorities, and they line up almost exactly with the barriers. So number one, training and upskilling program. That's the direct response to the skills shortage. Organizations are telling us that they want help building the human capacity, the digital workforce to use these technologies, not more vendors, not more pilots, but more skilled people. Number two, financial incentives for technology adoption. That's a direct response to the high cost. Organizations want public investment, tax instrument, incentives, grant programs, mechanisms that lower the entry ticket and de-risk the early stage of deployment. And number three, access to cloud-based platform for experimentation. That's the response to the infrastructure integration barrier. Organization want safe, accessible environment where they can test, prototype, and learn without having to build the infrastructure themselves. This is exactly the kind of shared infrastructure role that European initiatives are well placed to play. So if you look at the picture overall, the barrier aren't really technological. The technology is we can say that it's mature, but the use cases seem clear. The benefits are measurable. The barriers, they are about money, are skills, and access. And those are precisely the levers that public investments, European policy, and ecosystem initiatives are designed to pull. If you get those right, funding, skills, and shared platforms, the European virtual market will accelerate this current trajectory. And that's the opportunity in front of us. And that's what the rest of this conversation is about. So that was the market picture on my end. What we just walked through is the what, so the data on where European virtual worlds markets stand today, and to make sense of the so and the so what and the now what. I'm delighted to host this panel discussion with two people who live in this market every day. Very happy to introduce you again, Michael Barngrover, the Managing Director of XR for Europe. There are few people who have a better view of how the European virtual world and XR ecosystem is actually shaped. And also Lukasz Porwol, who leads the research on XR at the Insight Center, University of Galway, and looking at the digital innovation side, working at the intersection of immersive technology and transformation. Michael, Lukasz, thanks a lot for being here today. Very excited for the discussion here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Lapo. Thank you.
So between they've seen the virtual world market evolve from concept to real operation. So I want to use the next 20 to 30 minutes to precious test what we've just seen against their experience on the ground. So let's start with the first question for both. Let's start with Michael, and then we'll hear from Lukasz on his take. So we look at what I just presented today. The data suggests that European organizations are kind of past experimentation when it comes to virtual world technologies, but they're not scaling yet. Fewer than 1 in 6 organizations have fully integrated any of these technologies. At the same time, we're seeing projection of huge growth in the investment cycle for virtual world technologies, also in this year. From where you each sit, is Europe generally riding that wave, or are we lagging behind? Michael, let's start with you.
I mean, I guess the simple answer is they are riding the wave, and this wave goes up and down. It seems to be going up again, at least in the industrial and the enterprise application area. So my understanding, we've done some studies at XR for Europe in the last couple of years about the sentiment. What's the expectation of revenue growth for European SMEs who are providing these types of services, these types of tools and products? And they've consistently been expecting growth. So that confirms for us that there is increased adoption, or at least increased the scale of the adoption within companies who have already previously invested in the pilots. And that's reflected in the numbers that you showed. The issue, I mean, I think why we don't see fuller integration is just practically all of these technologies represent change initiatives in companies, and change initiatives are very frequently incomplete or unsuccessful, or they don't progress linearly. They're very dependent upon internal politics and buy-in, and just the nature of the decision-making between different types of stakeholders in an organization to really unlock that value and to make integration possible. So I don't look at the lack of maybe more full integration of these tools, any of the tools, as an indictment on, or even really much of an observation on the technology, the state of these technologies, but really just the nature of it. Takes sometimes years, it takes a generation for these types of change initiatives to really become complete inside of an organization.
Okay, thanks a lot. Lukasz?
Yeah, so I would agree with Michael to some extent that Europe is definitely riding the wave, but it's more on the intellectual and experimental side, while Europe definitely has an issue with scale. And I think if we compare it to, our counterparts on the other side of Atlantic, they have different approach here, right? So there is a lot of lean startups and start fast, fail fast, and move on. Europe is always more playing safe and trying to develop something that lasts. So that are completely different approaches, and that's why probably we see more of the technology being more visible, in other places than Europe. But yeah, Europe is a kind of less slow burner cooking stuff based off solid research, and so there are different approaches to the same problem, I would say. Europe yet needs to discover maybe better mechanisms to deploy products that last, the products that are visible. And I think that's the biggest difference, but that doesn't mean that Europe doesn't ride this wave. It's just different approach.
Well, and maybe if I can respond a little bit to that too. I think the US market is so much more consumer oriented, and that's a big area that is not it's not the priority. And to Lucas's point, there's definitely a different way companies approach how to launch a product. And I think the comfort is do that with an institution, do that with a business or an organization first before you go to consumer. And the US, I think, actually inverts that for the most part. I mean, not that may be a simplistic way of looking at it, but so the fact that there is this large consumer aspect of all of these technologies that were highlighted in this report, the fact that there's a big consumer market for this, or at least efforts to crack the consumer market in the U.S. particularly, maybe not China, but in the U.S. It means that a lot of the news, a lot of the talking points about these technologies are driven by a sector and types of applications and use cases that we just don't have at much in Europe. But with regard to enterprise or industrial adoption, I would love to see comparative stats with the US because my sense is that Europe, the adoption for industrial or enterprise tools and applications, I don't think is trailing or is maybe even that different than in the US. And I don't have strong evidence for that, but that's the general sense that I get. The types of tools and products that are being marketed are very similar in capacity. But one difference, actually, and I think Lucas again talked about scale. When Walmart decides we're going to do a pilot or a scaled pilot for a training, that's 30,000 headsets across like 2 to 3 million employees. It's still one company making one large scale pilot, but when you compare that to a large European enterprise, just the total numbers maybe look very different, even if in practice it's still one pilot implementation. So that also can kind of skew the direct comparisons between these two markets. It's just when one of those companies invests in something that they may not continue or they may not fully integrate, it looks so much bigger. But in some ways, it's kind of the same thing as if a company in Europe or Germany does it and scales it to 30,000 or 50,000 employees are engaged with some training application or something. So I think that's important to highlight there.
Maybe just to add also to Michael. So yeah, definitely there is the visibility difference, and a lot of European pilots are or demonstrators are internal. They are internal research projects, and they don't get enough visibility. While in the US, these are usually public rollouts or public testing. So again, very different approach at addressing the same issue, and I think both sides can kind of learn from each other on this. But yeah, I would say in Europe is kind of more under in the background, and that's why maybe there is a need for more visibility and more awareness of those movements as well. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. I agree completely also because we do have the data that I just showed also for worldwide. And I mean, I need to double check, but if I recall correctly, the adoption is not, there's not a huge difference between the US and Europe. And I agree, that the main difference is that, an investment, it's on the scale of the investment. Like an investment is kind of 10x in the US, what is in terms of like just actual funds, but that's also based on the different economies. So yeah, great points there. So moving from the market and European position to the actual technologies. Question on the hardware, because I know it's a very hot topic now, and again for both. The perception has long been that XR and subsequently virtual worlds in general is driven by new developments in hardware and devices, whether they've head-mounted displays, glasses, or projector. To what extent do you guys think this perception still holds, and what other forces might be shaping the field just as much, if not more? Let's start with Michael again.
I would say that it probably still holds, that the industry is still quite device driven. Because usually with these new devices, I mean, these new functionalities are coming with these new devices, and that's new functionalities mean that you can now pilot new types of use cases or new types of elements to an existing use case to make the return on investment better. But I don't really think it should. I don't. I mean, I think we're kind of past the point of needing to have new devices that are iterative improvements on before. They're nice to have. They're good to have. But I think the devices that are largely out in the market have demonstrated a return, and when you have new devices, it starts to again complicate a decision for a company. What are we going to go with? Do we go with this device that all of these developers, all these vendors are very experienced with? Um, but we're also a little bit in a lull, or at least the perception of a lull, because I would say the industry is expecting no new headsets, this year, which was previously an expectation. Now that the expectation maybe is next year or the year after, so the focus is when is new hardware coming, and that's a little bit of a distraction. So it still drives the industry, but I would hope that it doesn't drive it as much now as maybe it did a few years ago. But we'll see because we have the AR glasses. I know maybe Lucas maybe knows even more about what's coming out with the AR glasses. That drives a lot of hype. But as a new category of device, it basically just opens up all these questions again of, well, you can do this, but what's the return? Well, we don't know because there's not enough pilots, or the pilots are very incomplete in their supporting data. So, yeah.
Okay, so and I would agree with Michael that this is still a device-driven market, and there's several reasons for that. Because we are still waiting for mainstreaming of those technologies. They are still kind of niche devices, let's face it, but they're on their way to be mainstream. And I think what we witnessed today is similar to what happened to the mobile devices market. There was no really smart phone market until Apple released iPhone, the first iPhone, and then kind of created entire new market, an entire new space for apps and for technologies, for services. And then it followed, of course, by devices from other producers. We got Android and so many other devices that operate, but now they operate seamlessly thanks to standards and interoperability. And it doesn't matter which type of smart device you have, you are able to access all those services and apps regardless. So that's yet to come and to happen in the space of virtual worlds, AR and VR. Combined with AI to see this kind of convergence and standardization, and maybe that's also a good space for Europe to to chip in to ensure that there is a common layer at some point. The new, let's say, smart mobile market where regardless of the devices, you can access those services and they can be developed independently and deployed on different devices. And that's also that can be seen in the AR glasses market, that you see that this year is particularly abundant. With many devices coming next year, it will be even more. So as those devices flood the market, there is imminent need for standardization and some kind of convergence in terms of the software and the services they run. So I'm positive. I think we're actually at the inflection point where we reach maturity of those technologies and penetration enough to jump to what we've seen, what happened to the iPhone and Android devices.
I mean, I think this is the mobile device is it is a great comparison, right? It's not apples to apples. There are some fundamental differences, but it's a good reference because I would probably disagree a little bit with the history in terms of the origin of the smartphone, because I happen to leave. I left my original country at the time where I think smartphone 2 was, or iPhone 2 was out, but it still wasn't an ubiquitous device. And there were other players. The smartphone market had existed before Apple entered it with some success, but not the tremendous exponential success that came after. But what had been a big hit before for enterprise was BlackBerry. BlackBerry was this a thing that every professional had to have, right? But it wasn't a consumer, mobile phone. It was a professional enterprise mobile phone. And what I found interesting for this analogy when it comes to virtual worlds and extended reality types of applications is, and maybe the computer is a better an analog here. Companies and enterprises were using computers for decades. They were doing pilots with them. They were using them for slowly, integrating them into their operations, but only when there were personal computers and an entire generation or multiple generations of people started to explore how they could use it for all types of things, did that come in and really accelerate the computerization of all businesses and industries. So I think the same thing should be expected here, and with also the mobile device was the same thing. Until everyone had a smartphone, businesses used it like in the BlackBerry sense as a type of, a version of accessing your emails and your text messages. didn't really become an entire space to operate, manage your teams, and engage with all, with customers and other clients until everyone had the phone. They were very comfortable with using it, and now it was possible to really roll this out for a business. And the lesson here for Europe is you can't really have a fully realized enterprise and industrial technology space if you do not have a consumer one. You cannot just split it because the consumer trains future generations to bring all this insight into the businesses that they found, the businesses that they work for. And I would say that largely a lot of policy in Europe, when it comes to ethics, they only talk about consumer and social applications, which when they come to investment, they only really want to focus on industrial applications. So Europe is by not incentivizing and supporting a consumer space for immersive XR and virtual worlds, by not really prioritizing the consumer space, they're missing half of the picture. And I think that's going to be tremendously important that you have to find a way to have both sides, the consumer side, and we have initiatives like Virtual World Skills Academy. We have initiatives that are going to be specifically targeting younger demographics in Europe, developing skills. But that's one aspect of it. Again, you have to not just skills, but you have to be supporting businesses now in Europe to create consumer-facing applications with these technologies.
And maybe to add to what Michael just said is that as Europe, kind of struggles in supporting consumer market, that's also visible in the device space. So there is virtually almost none, very few successful hardware producers in Europe in this space. And unfortunately, we may follow, the same pattern with what's happened to mobile devices, like, Siemens and other producers of phones. Like, where are they today, right? So there was many mobile devices producers, but suddenly now there's very few or to none European players in the space of the mobile phones. And it seems like, unfortunately, this pattern is being repeated now with AR, VR devices. And what we have is great industrial devices, but we don't have consumer devices. So if nothing is done soon, that will have strong implications also with what will happen after, which is the market. Yeah. So first the devices. Michael mentioned the BlackBerry. Of course, that's also something to acknowledge. There were those devices. They drove their ecosystems. They merged into the smart device market. And that's what is happening right now. But if we don't have players, it will be hard to progress to stage 2 if we don't have stage 1 covered. Yeah.
Thank you both. So you talked extensively about industrial application, and that's where also I focused most of my presentation. And let's go a bit more granular there because I showed some results of adoption and maturity by industry. And we saw healthcare and finance leading adoption, and then public sector lagging. And this is quite significant, especially the EU's initiatives and Web 4.0 strategy explicitly targeting also virtual public services. Let's go with you, Lukasz. Why do you think the public sector is slow to convert this interest? Because we saw that there's interest into deployment, and what does a credible public sector use case actually look like? There was also a question in the chat. We'll also be covering that later, but let's try to address this.
Also, I had the privilege to work extensively on virtual worlds, both with public sector and finance industry. And I would say there is a lot of common points in terms of the barriers, and many of those go down to actually things beyond technology. They go down to procurement, governance, accessibility, network restrictions, connectivity, a lot of other aspects, cybersecurity, which matter and are paramount for serious uses of virtual world and AI technologies, right? So as much as we are maybe more forgiving in the consumer market, okay, oh, that we did wrong, some data was leaked, whatever, that is unacceptable in public sector or enterprise or finance sector, right? So that has to be highly secure, highly regulated, governed, and then on top of that, you have administrative or semi-technical issues, which is down to procurement processes and also all kind of restrictions, including network restrictions, where services just cannot run freely in a very confined environment. So, and in terms of use case, for both actually, but public sector in particular, there is just, there is a missing case that would be really solving a big problem. Like, what is the big problem that these virtual worlds can solve, so that the effort, not only financial but administrative and organizational, can be justified. Because okay, we can spend millions of euros on a new AR system for public participation, but what does it solve? What does it solve that current mobile smart devices cannot solve? And I think that's the biggest problem with virtual worlds. We still are yet to see use cases that solve a big costly problem that other systems or devices can't. And I think until we figure it out, that will be continuously challenging to justify the additional effort, which again, I want to stress, is not only technical, it's also financial, organizational, that is required in order to address this issue.
Great, thank you, Lukasz. And still on the more granular view at sector level, Michael, I wanted to ask you about the state of the immersive media for consumers and public audiences, because there's a lot of attention paid to the numbers of devices sold, but location-based experiences have been around for a long time and seem to be increasingly visible in museum and exhibition. Is this a growing application area?
Yeah. Simple answer, yes. But by all accounts, it is. How fast it's growing, this data is unfortunately really not accessible. Not accessible at the national level, or if it is, it's confidential. It's not allowed to be shared. I know that France is perhaps the most advanced market in this particular space, because they do fund a lot of cultural productions. So it's some type of education or entertainment or edutainment or art and there's a diverse range of types of experiences that they fund for locations. They're seeing adoption within cinemas because of the changing nature of moviegoers and audiences there. You have cinemas that have space that could be reconfigured to facilitate location based, and there's apparently growth in this area. But the funding across Europe, where there is funding for immersive media, consistently does not fund exhibition and distribution is the more historic issue, but more recently, they're not funding exhibition. So they're not funding cinemas to adapt their spaces to be able to feature this type of immersive content. So it means that you do have a lot of, you have demand, you have clear quantifiable demand from audiences for this type of wow experience that mixed reality or virtual reality can present, or projection mapping, onto environments can present. But what you don't have as many venues as you need, and that's actually especially true for many parts of Europe that just don't have as much, I guess, cultural sector investment in this, or they have still more traditional cultural institutions. Germany, surprisingly, is a space where I'm told there really isn't much in the way of large scale, like projection mapping and free roam capable venues, despite the fact that there's a lot of content production coming out of that particular market. And then we have issues, of course, with Eastern and Southern Europe as well, that you have content creators, you have companies who are creating to the production, usually of French works. They're doing co-productions, but they themselves don't have the venues in their home markets to actually exhibit this. So, but I know from observation, and I recently attended an economic mission for immersive media from Brussels to New York, that this is a growing space in other markets as well. These types of, again, you go to a place for something you can see nowhere else. You can only see this type of experience through this type of large-scale location-based VR or mixed reality, and again, all this projection mapping type of experience. So it is growing.
Great, amazing. Thank you very much. One final question to you both, then we'll move on to the Q&A because I saw there are a couple of questions there. a kind of provocative one, but I'm sure you'll provide thoughtful insights. If you had to name one thing the European ecosystem needs to get right in the next couple of years, could be one policy lever or an ecosystem move or investment shift, what would it be? And conversely, what's the one thing that we are at risk of doing wrong? Let's start with Michael.
So I know what I feel needs to happen, but I don't know who could possibly be responsible for it. This is not something that and in the time frame, be responsible for achieving this in the time frame. What needs to happen is there needs to be a greater sense of a European market. We talk about the single market, and everyone is aware of the challenges to scale even within the single market because these are different countries. They have local prioritization for any type of public funding, oftentimes, which means that then when you're looking to scale, if you serve institutional clients in your country, you're probably not even going to be eligible to serve similar types of clients in other countries because there'll be local criteria for local providers, vendors. So I tell this story. I was talking with a Polish company that provides VR equipment, XR equipment for companies, for exhibitions. They move it around, and they're based in Western Poland, right near to the German border. So I just asked, are they also serving German clients? Because I get requests. I'm looking for a company that can provide me devices for things that I'm doing, exhibitions or demos, or I'm going to be doing a pilot for a client. And that particular company just said, no, we're not currently considering international expansion. And I thought, well, we're talking about, I don't know, 100 kilometers. Is this international expansion? And for them, it was. The difference between Germany and the United States was not great in terms of how difficult and what the challenge represented. And this is an ideology. I don't think that it's not fair to say that it's equally difficult. Going across the Atlantic Ocean is a fundamentally different challenge. But there is definitely a need to change the perception that this is a shared market among entrepreneurs and buyers. And I don't know who can do that. I mean, I know that the European Union wants to do this, and the Commission definitely puts forth initiatives to address this. But this almost seems like a generational thing. It seems like it's something bigger, and I don't know who would be responsible for it. But as long as you have companies that are developing new technologies and look at the next country, the next national market within a shared market within the union, equivalent with like a market on the other side of the world, it's very hard for this space to really grow and scale.
Yeah, great point. Lukasz?
Yeah, I might pick on where Michael finished and make it even more controversial. I would say that I would love to see Europe to be more open, and rather than looking inwards, look more outwards. And despite whatever trends we observe, of course, sovereignty, digital sovereignty, and all these things are important. But I feel like Europe should go with the European spirit and be very open at the European level, but also outside, to make sure that we can consume technologies from everywhere in the world, use it as a building blocks, and expand and build on top of them freely, and also to mingle with other entities worldwide without restrictions at this level, because it's still relatively early, and I think Europe maybe has tendency to overregulate things, of course, for the good reasons. But until those technologies are mature, sometimes maybe we could allow for more incubation before they are really taking over. And this requires this middle stage where collaboration and cooperation globally is very, very important, regardless where those entities come from. So I would like to see more global collaboration and more open market in this space.
Maybe before we get to the Q&A, if we have a chance, I think this is a really valuable point. It's how do you get this balance right? So I'd like to share again this observation that I had in New York when we were attending an event hosted by the Belgian American Chamber of Commerce. So they were all speakers from Belgium, investors, venture capitalists, and entrepreneurs. And to Lucas's point, the challenge for balancing this is, again, is it Europe going, or is it Germany? Is it Belgium? Is it Spain? Again, seeing this balance of equivalence, because the message from most explicitly from the venture capitalist, who's Belgian but has been based in the US market for a number of years, and the entrepreneurs as well, is if you're a Belgian company and you want to enter the US market, give up being Belgian. And that was made explicit. You cannot succeed in the US market if it's not your only priority. You can run Europe, you can run Belgium, you can run it from the US. Become US centric, give up any prioritization. And again, what I'm saying, I'm not, it was explicit. The venture capitalist said it would be a red flag. They would not invest in a European company that came to the US market and did not bring all decision making to the US market. They would not invest in them. And so that's the fundamental challenge, I think, in how to balance this openness, because you use the technology, sure. I mean, we do that. It probably wouldn't be possible to avoid using the technologies, but when we come to growing and serving other markets, how do we maintain that the decision making is informed by European regulation? Because what happens when the decision making goes to another regulatory environment, the products are developed, the business models are developed according to a different regulatory environment, and then when they come, they're coming back to Europe as a European founded entity, coming back to Europe, advocating for a different regulatory environment that serves different cultural and social and industrial priorities. So it's a very difficult balance to get.
Great. Thank you both very much for the very valuable insights, but I'm going to keep you here for the Q&A because there are a couple of questions where I will need your assistance. The first one, it's kind of linked to this, but more on the kind of challenges in Europe, and sort of more of a comment than a question, but let's try to add some flavor to that. The comment is the paramount question is value added between technology and education is lacking. Do you see this point, any of you, Lukasz or Michael, in terms of an issue, the value added that the technologies, virtual technology add, and education is lacking both in terms of skills as well as maybe knowledge?
Yeah. So maybe on skills, I can pick that. Yeah, definitely there is a problem in terms of skills. I've been interviewing many companies, and there is lack of skill. Majority of the experts or employees come from the gaming industry, which is close enough, but it's not everything. There is a very specific skill set required for AR, VR, and mixed reality, or combined solutions, and it goes beyond even technology. It goes to 3D design. It goes towards storytelling. There is a lot of other aspects, and we are missing dedicated courses towards these new emerging technologies. Universities and other levels of educations are lacking master courses, engineering courses, and most of all, actually, interesting enough, in Europe, we have insufficient engineering output. So unfortunately, the STEM or STEAM graduates are going lower every year, and that's concerning, especially in the spaces related to technology. So we have many dropouts, we have insufficient numbers, and that's why we continuously require expertise from outside Europe, and that's something to be addressed ASAP. In terms of the value added of XR, definitely the strong use cases, as I mentioned, in the public sector, in the enterprise sector, that's something that is definitely essential in order for this to thrive. This hopefully will emerge faster once the devices are more capable and more mainstream because of interoperability and standardization. This will be easier to see. At the moment, because of compartmentalization of the market, that's still kind of difficult. But the moment we have better interoperability, that will be easier to deliver.
Great. Thank you very much, Lukasz. And Michael, your last point was willingly kind of provocative, and it sparked some question. There's a question directed to you. If I think I know the answer, but the question is: do you mean we should force companies to move decision making and become EU-centric like US does?
Yeah, I should clarify that this isn't the US in requiring this in the sense of a government or something. That this is investors saying that this is the hallmark of a business we want to support, is that they bring the decision making to the market where they have the greatest profitability and the greatest scalability. So this is not a government requirement, to my knowledge. Unlike there are some, there's some countries, I think, China has this history of requiring the localization, these types of obligations. No, I don't think the EU can force that, because again, that would be, that's up to the member states probably to decide, and then that gets then it would be in Europe or in that particular member state. But again, to clarify, this is coming from investors. And this is not the first time I have heard this type of requirement from an investor voice, but it just happened to be so explicit in the specific context of Belgian founders and startups. So this goes back to the issue of the single market and making an entire generation of entrepreneurs see the single market as exactly that. It's a one market with scalable potential rather than a collection of markets where there is some harmonization and some integration, but you still should see these markets as distinct international markets from wherever you were founded and based. And as I said before, this is not me criticizing any entity, because this is a generational societal change, ideological change, and I do not know how one could do this. But it is to say that we talk about I think the Draghi report talked about bringing together the capital markets together to try to pull larger sums. This is also realizing that investors don't have the same objectives as the European Union, right? Investors are looking at their fiduciary responsibilities. What is the best profitability for the company I'm investing in, the best return for my investment and for the investment I'm responsible for. So how do we incentivize investors to not say, relocate your decision making to the more valued market? And that's a conversation to have with investors. And probably they're going to be honest that they don't care about these geopolitical these motivations and strategies of the European Union. They'll probably be quite honest with that. But so how do you change their mind? How to incentivize them to localize decision, to keep decision making within the regulatory environment that we want it to be in?
Lukasz, you want to add anything else?
No, I think I can just support what Michael just said. It's about organic work, how to make European market more attractive, both for producers and investors. At the moment we are lacking large investments in that space in Europe, and that's kind of a recurring issue for many startups as well. And we know the story just goes on and on and on. And they went to Silicon Valley, and they went there. And most of the European unicorns end up there sooner or later. That there is a clear issue here. So how we can avert this trend organically, because you cannot do anything by force. You cannot do it, through regulation. Now you shall stay and not adhere to this regulation. So that is a big problem to be solved organically, but that requires a lot of groundwork and making sure that we create an environment that is inclusive and supportive and allows for investment to thrive. And at the moment, it's still difficult. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have one final question, which I think was actually partly answered already by Lukasz before, and it helped me to link to the final point today. So they were asking about some example of virtual world solutions being used by each sector, especially finance and public sector. This was partially covered by Lukasz, but without adding any spoilers, this will actually be more the topic of the next webinar that we have planned for this series on May 26, where we will look at concrete applications of virtual world technologies in Europe. So we looked at the adoption part. Now let's look at more the concrete side and how organizations are actually deploying virtual world solution. And then also wanted to flag the third and last webinar of this series in June, looking at the key requirements for a sustainable European virtual worlds ecosystem. So, focusing again more on some of the points that we touched upon today. And yeah, really looking forward to that. With that, I'd like to thank Lukasz, Michael, and Fabio so much for your input today. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you later in May for the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
And thank you.